Hi there and welcome to this, my April wrap, in which I reflect on both the quality and the quantity of the books I read this month. Now in terms of quantity, it was, I guess, a typical month. I read 7 books, 6 in physical format and 1 in the dreaded EPUB format. So without further ado, let's get into the physical books I read. And we begin with 2 I read for my class on the Gothic. And first of them is an absolute classic, Dracula by Bram Stoker. This is the 3rd time I've read Dracula, and I would say this time I really enjoyed the final third the most. It's the part where there's an investigative element as they track down all of Dracula's boxes of earth, and then Dracula tries to flee back to Transylvania and they pursue him and then slay him, of course. Wonderful read. I'd forgotten quite how weird that final section is. If you've never given this a try, there are always classics that are missing from our reading, then I sincerely recommend this one. Picture there is from the wonderful Nosferatu movie. And then next I read number 13 by M.R. James, the master, the originator indeed of the antiquarian ghost story. And number 13 is set in Denmark and concerns spooky goings on at a hotel, the Golden Lion. And it's not particularly creepy, but it is rather satisfying. I'm going to write a paper on this for this Gothic class. Yeah, M.R. James, a particular favourite. I did make a video about this collection actually. If you wish to view it, the link is in the description. Then, reading from my PhD research, I'm trying to get through sort of one illness narrative a month, and this month it was Dying, a Memoir by Cory Taylor, an Australian lady. And I did not find this actually very good. I didn't think the writing was particularly accomplished. However, as I mentioned in the 1Q Q&A, often it's these books which are a failure artistically that are the most useful in terms of writing about my topic. So I guess this may prove in time rather useful. Then reading away from the course, and I know I really should get out of this habit, but I just can't stop myself just picking up something I'm just desperate to read and getting into it, regardless of whether it helps my studies or not. And this month was no exception, and I read the first 600 pages of Boccaccio's The Decameron, and I have to say, this was absolutely superb, so elegantly written, rich in incident, and very humorous too. And each story is perhaps only 15 pages long maximum, so it's not that hard to get through. So for anyone put off by the prodigious length of this book, it's some 800 pages, don't be. It's not like reading a particularly deep novel full of philosophical musings. These are very directly told stories, and I just won't even go into it now, how funny they were, but they were seriously earthy, seriously rude upon occasion, and had me chuckling out loud there in the corner. Next, we have a very obscure book, I might say, which is Keith Vaughan's Journals, 1939 to 1977. Yeah, rather obscure, I guess, but for my life writing interest, I thought I'd get hold of this. This can actually be a rather expensive book. I've seen it listed for over $100 in fine condition and hardback form, which this one is. It is actually ex-library, and there's a book plate at the front, which indicates it was previously inhabiting the Belfast Library. They must have had a sale, or some light-fingered individual pilfered it. Never mind, the Belfast Library's loss is the disappointed man's gain. Now, who was Keith Vaughan? He was an accomplished artist who's associated with the neo-romantic movement in the interwar years in England, and there are some sketches of his in here. And he was a conscientious objector. So during the war, here are some sketches here. So during the war, he worked for the St. John's Ambulance as a volunteer, obviously, and they're very moving journal entries about meeting trains full of wounded Allied soldiers and tending to their wounds. I found those really fascinating. And there also his kind of depression being noted here. He wasn't a particularly happy soul. The writing is excellent, and he was friends with all the other neo-romantic artists. I'm going to mention a few more of them in this video. So, as I said, a rather obscure, expensive book, and the purchase of this was made possible actually by the donations to the channel. So I should thank this month's donors, who were Richard and Michael. I think they are repeat offenders in terms of buying me a coffee. If anyone else wants to donate, then follow the link in the description to this video, or go to my channel homepage and click on the buy me a coffee link. It would be much appreciated. All of the funds are spent on books for the channel. Then next, the last of the physical books, it is Aristotle's Poetics, and I found this for pennies in a used bookstore here. I read it maybe 30 years ago for the first time. I reread it because it's just useful to refresh one's memory. And yeah, I didn't really glean anything new, but I think sometimes it's better just to go back to these foundational texts that define a particular genre, in this case tragedy and comedy, and just take your cue from there, rather than reading all these rather complex commentaries that have accumulated over the millennia in the case of this text. And then finally the EPUB book, and I have to read its subtitle. It's going to be really difficult to remember. It was Alexandra Harris's. It's non-fiction actually, it's more art history. It's concerned again with these neo-romantic painters that I'm interested in. Denton Welsh, one of my favourites actually, is also somewhat evocative of the style of the neo-romantics. The two principal artists of that movement were Graham Sutherland and Paul Nash, and Denton Welsh does mention Paul Nash a fair few times. At the end of this one, for example, at the end of I Left My Grandfather's House, he sort of looks at a picture he's doing. I think he's producing a watercolour, and says, oh, maybe it looks a little like a Paul Nash. He's kind of overestimating his talents probably, but that's where that narrative cuts off. So back to the book. It was Alexandra Harris's 2010 Romantic Moderns, and this was absolutely superb as well. A really fascinating read, and I'll give you the subtitle and that will help you understand more what's going on. English writers, artists and the imagination, from Virginia Woolf to John Piper. And what really distinguished this book is the quality and the quantity of the illustrations, and they introduced me to so many painters I was not particularly aware of, one of whom I've taken straight to my heart, and that is Eric Ravilious. And I'll just show you one of his paintings, and then maybe you'll understand why. There's this modernist element, but there's such clarity here, and as images of the English landscape, I think these are rather unrivaled. He was also an accomplished wood engraver, so I'll just show you one of his wood engravings. I'm definitely going to get hold of Alexandra Harris's book in physical format, a hardback. In fact, it impressed me so much, but it wasn't actually my book of the month because it's very difficult. Oh, where is it? It's really impossible actually, isn't it, to top the Decameron. Nothing's going to be better than this in the month I read this. My intention is, after finishing this, to read the Heptameron, which is a similar work actually inspired by Boccaccio, and it was written by I believe it's a Queen of Navarre in France. Can't remember her name offhand, but it's 70 stories rather than the 100 that you find here. I'm really keen to get my reading of that done too. So the book of the month for April is the Decameron. Please, if you haven't read it already, or you've always been thinking of reading it, pick it up and just get started. I promise you will not be disappointed. Okay, I think I've said all I need to say. Apologies that there were not that many uploads this month. I am really busy. There's also been the earthquake and some illness, and so it's not been the most productive month in terms of the channel. Do not lose faith in the disappointed man. May, I believe, will be a more productive month on the video front. I've got my one on Edgar Allan Poe scheduled next, so please stay tuned. Please keep supporting me, and I shall see you very soon. But for now, all that remains is I should bid you farewell in my customary fashion. So be safe, be strong, nanu nanu.